Good morning. Today is July 18th, 2017, and I'm Paul Glumaz, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. I'm a 43-and-a-half-year veteran of associating myself with and organizing with the political movement of Lyndon and Helga Zepp LaRouche. So I'm an ancient, not that ancient, person who has had an eye on things for a long time and has had the opportunity to see and observe and intervene on processes over that 43-year period. Now, today it is becoming very clear that while Trump is committed to ending the ruinous policies of permanent war and destruction that the last two administrations have been embarked upon, especially since the advent of 9/11, which occurred 16 and a half years ago, we have a developing situation internationally where France has shifted, and the president of France is now saying that in his discussions with Vladimir Putin, France is shifting from the he's saying he shifted from the previous president, Hollande, and that no longer is France's position the overthrow of Assad, but bringing peace and reconciliation, and he has pretty much shifted France in a very big way, and has opened, and when Trump was in France, he was on Bastille Day. There was a press conference with the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, and what happened there is that in the question and answer period, a Chinese journalist asked Donald Trump what he thought of China's President Xi Jinping, and Trump said that Xi Jinping is an incredibly special, valuable human being as a person, and that he loves China. Also, Donald Trump has said that Putin is someone who loves Russia, and I love the United States. And then it was reported in the same period that Putin's observations of Trump were reported, and what Putin said is that Donald Trump, in the discussions he had with him, is absolutely not like the persona that Trump presents in public, which is somewhat of which is not what Putin experienced. That Trump is very warm, very open, and he's a very good listener, and he listens very carefully. And if he disagrees, he will go into an explanation of his disagreements. So this is important, because in the impression that the Russians and the Chinese are getting is that there is a president in the United States who's not playing games, who doesn't have a psychotic ideological issue, and who's willing to discuss things from the standpoint of what is in the interest of the United States and what is in the interest of the other country, and is willing to talk to on that basis, not on the basis of human rights violations and on the basis of, you don't have enough democracy, you got to break open your society so the bankers can come in and loot you, and all this kind of stuff that normally you get in these agendas that are worked out by the deep state. So while this is well and good, and the ceasefire that was is still holding, as far as I know, in the parts of Syria, and there's increasing involvement of the French in all of this. The situation internally in the United States with respect to Donald Trump at the presidency and the situation could not be more extreme, and could not be more unstable, and could not be more it could not be more up in the air. Okay, and this is really a crisis that's now developing here in the United States. Okay. First of all, Wall Street surrounds the president. Wall Street is running the Treasury with Steve Mnuchin. Trump at this time has no leverage to deal with Wall Street. And this then creates the perception that can be played, which it is being played, that Trump is a fraud because he put Wall Street all over his government, Goldman Sachs, otherwise known as Goldman Sachs. People like Steve Mnuchin are in the whole in the driver's seat right now. Okay, and the Federal Reserve Chairman is saying publicly that GlassSteagall was the cause of the collapse. That it was the legacy of GlassSteagall which caused the collapse, not the deregulation of the banking system. She's saying that Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns would not have gone under if they had had access to the deposit base. Right. In other words, the thing that's keeping the financial system together is the fact that the banks have access to the deposit base, and they can speculate with the deposit base. This statement by Janet Yellen, the head of the Federal Reserve, indicates just how extreme the situation is. The bankers are in control of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department, and they are surrounding the Trump administration. So people like Elizabeth Warren and all these people can dismiss Trump as a fraud. He never really, he said he was for GlassSteagall, but he really isn't. He doesn't really want GlassSteagall. He's just saying that, and so that's their line. Okay. Now, surrounding Trump are also his enemies, people that are totally opposed to what he's doing. People like Nikki Haley, the ambassador to the United Nations. People like General McMaster, the head of national security. People like Steve Mnuchin. People like Mike Pompeo, the head of the CIA, when he was confronted by Trump earlier on the veracity of the claim that the Syrians did the chemical weapons, in the Syrian government did the chemical weapons, which everyone outside the United States believes it was not Syria, and in some cases it was not even chemical weapons. Pompeo, when confronted with that, told Trump there's high confidence that that's the case. High confidence. What's that? So here you have a CIA director lying, or not quite lying, but playing those kind of games with the president. So that means that CIA director is working for the deep state. So then you have Robert Mueller in charge of the investigation into the Russia thing. He's the special counsel. And then in the middle of all this, you had the explosion around Donald Trump Jr. and this meeting with this Russian lawyer who was connected to Fusion GPS, which now looks like it's an extension of British intelligence. It's a cutout for British MI6, and cooperates with the FBI, which is doing opposition research. She was involved with them, and then she had a special pass. She was granted a visa. She wasn't granted a visa. She was allowed in, and that email was a setup. So now you have the entire media saying, now we got the proof of Russian involvement. And when we confronted Elizabeth Warren on when we were, Elizabeth Warren said that, yeah, we're now going in for the kill, and we're also using Congress to block any kind of trade, any kind of collaboration with Russia. Not just permanently preventing the president from having a hand in removing sanctions and increasing the sanctions on Russia. So Congress is right now in rebellion against the president on foreign policy. And there's enough Republicans who are part of the system, and the Democrats are leading the charge for going to war, for having wars. And if you remove Trump, you will have a disintegration into wars, because that's what the Bush and Obama represented, and that's what these Democrats represent, and that's what these Republicans represent. Most Republicans represent war. Most Democrats represent war. There is probably a faction of Democrats that don't represent war, but most of them, even the most anti-war Democrats like Barbara Lee, are pushing for war with Russia as part of the whole package. So this is a very very disturbing situation. Now, however, so when we have a situation like this inside the United States, we have what's called a dual power situation. That means you have an unresolved confrontation between two very different powers that are emerging. And the dual power situation is where you don't have a resolution of that power. You don't have a power. You don't have a central power anymore. You have two competing powers that are openly clashing over who and what is going to control the direction of the United States. Okay, and the two powers are the institutional imperial system of the Atlantic system. It's embedded deep state inside the United States, which has been there for a while. It goes back to FDR and the prevention of Henry Wallace from becoming the vice presidential candidate. It goes back to the Cold War. It goes back to the FBI. It goes back to the assassination of Kennedy and Malcolm X and Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy. That's the deep state. That's what it's the deep state that got us into Vietnam. It's the deep state that prevented the United States from having an FDR development policy for the third world. This is what is now at war with Donald Trump. Okay, and what's the other state? Well, the other state is really not fully a state yet, and it has not consolidated itself, and that is the population of the United States, which has rejected both parties, which has rejected the institutions, which has rejected the Beltway, has rejected Wall Street. That is not a uniform group. There's religious people. A lot of them are libertarians. There's a lot of them are former Democrats or current Democrats who are sick and fed up with the Democratic Party. A lot of them are Republicans or former Republicans who are sick and fed up of the Republican Party, and they are the ones who elected Trump. Trump was elected because the system politically no longer has a large portion of the population believing in it. The parties have collapsed, but the residual structures of power beyond the parties, which are being deployed, are not agreeable to this situation. So you have a confrontation. Now, everyone's complaining about Donald Trump's tweets. They're very unpresidential, blah, 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 blah. And all of the people with high academic degrees and are habituated to a certain way of thinking and what have you, they go berserk over the tweets that Donald Trump puts out. But you have to understand, those those tweets are communicating to 30 plus million people of his base who are on his tweet account. He's letting them know that he's not giving up. That's what the tweets are about. The tweets aren't necessarily there that there's a fight. But from a policy standpoint, from a domestic policy standpoint, Donald Trump is completely boxed in. And we are beginning to see the beginnings of a disintegration of the financial system now. The only thing keeping the stock market up is the fact that the quantitative easing being used to bail out the banks, a lot of it is going into buying bank stock. I mean, going into buying not just bank stock, but actual the stock market. Companies are buying their own stock. When the price of the stock is artificially inflated by everyone buying the stock, that's just an example. Now, let me give you a sense of this. The Chinese adopted GlassSteagall measures and created banks that were operating on GlassSteagall criteria a little over 20 years ago. Okay, and since the crash, these banks have created, with the backing of the Chinese government, these banks have created $10 trillion worth of credit. Where did that money go? Well, it went into infrastructure. It went into development. And an increasing portion of that is going outside of China into other nations to participate in the One Belt, One Road to develop. In the same period of time, the Japanese, the U.S., the European financial institutions have issued $15 trillion of quantitative easing to the banks. Where did that money go? To prop up the Ponzi scheme, to prop up the rollover of debts, to prop up derivatives. Most of the profit that the Chinese banking system makes is off of the interest on the loans that they issue for commercial and infrastructure and what have you. Most of the profit that large internet banks in the West make, U.S., European banks, Japanese banks make, the lion's share of their profit is from non-lending. That is from speculation. This is the tale of two financial systems. One has GlassSteagall in it and is a Hamiltonian system and is with Confucian characteristics. That's the Chinese one. The Western one is just a bailout machine. Okay. And that bailout machine can't go on forever. So here we have a situation, the paradox, where we have these progressive Democrats, Elizabeth Warren and many others, and the Congress and the Senate, they're pushing GlassSteagall. They're pushing these things, but they're really not pushing GlassSteagall and what have you. They're not really that serious. They're more serious about getting rid of Trump, as if somehow that's going to generate GlassSteagall. My advice to the Democratic Party, and I've been talking to the Democrats here in Washington State, has been dump the Russia thing and just go with an FDR program. Go with it and see what happens, and see if Trump breaks with the Republican Koch brother, budget cutters and crazy, want to wipe out, the poor. See if he breaks with those people. But you're not giving him an option. You're running an operation to get rid of him, so he has no room. That's what I'm telling the Democrats. And there's some Democratic leaders that agree with me, because that is the case. Because Trump is not a Republican. He represents an uprising against the system within the population, within many different layers of the population. The second thing is, at some point, if Trump's still in office and not removed, and this financial system blows like it did for FDR as he was being inaugurated, or just before he was being, and as he was coming in and was giving a speech where he said the high temple, you know, um, um, the money changers have lost their high seat in the temple of our civilizations, and we have to implement these policies or else, and if the Congress doesn't pass them, we have to do it by emergency. Okay? That was the situation FDR was in. If Trump were in that kind of situation, he would have to do something similar. Okay? And that's about the only time that he would have to do it, because right now he has no support in the Congress. He has none. Not from the Democrats, not from the Republicans, on doing what has to be done. Okay? None. The Congress is in rebellion against the president. And the Democrats are self-destructing. They're in their Russia operation. Now, here's where the LaRouche movement, here's where our movement comes in. Our job right now is to get back out there into the streets and talk to people and get the many different components of the base that elected Trump, to get them to conceptualize in a more profound way the policies that are needed, because they need to be upgraded. Because right now, if Trump is not going to deliver at some point, they're not going to be there for him. They're going to throw him out with the rest. And then we're going to have a very violent situation in the United States. Now, because out there in this population is a very angry bunch of people. Okay, many of them have guns. Many of them are law enforcement, are local law enforcement. Many of them are average people. And they're right now hoping that Trump can do something. And at some point, if he can't get the Democrats to go with him, he has no support among the Republicans. At some point in a time of crisis, he's going to have to go directly to the population and get them out on the street, demonstrating, or surrounding Congress, or whatever. And it's going to get ugly. So that's where we're headed if these Democrats don't wake up and realize that that's what they're helping to create, a civil war in the United States. That's where we face if Trump is not able to get the various, is not able to put together a ruling a system of government. The United States right now does not have a government. It's in a crisis. So Trump cannot govern. And if Trump can't govern and it goes to that stage, then it's civil war in the United States. And at the deepest level, the issue is not even economics. It's theological. Okay, you have a theological crisis because you have a population that doesn't believe in this postmodernist attack on progress, on family, on productive employment, on a future. This postmodernist attack, this on it, and so you have a profound cultural difference between the people that are in the LBGT, who the Greens who want to kill everybody in order to save Mother Nature, want to stop all development, and you have the population that has a different moral, has a different cultural orientation, whether they be Muslim, Jewish, Christian, or Confucian. And China has now merging the belief in scientific and technological progress with their tradition of Confucianism. The Russians are doing that in the context of their tradition of Russian Orthodoxy. There's now Islamic tendencies moving in that direction. Now that Syria has survived, we have this So there's a theological, cultural question about the nature of man. Is man in the image of God, or is man just another animal? You know, trying to survive against all other animals. This is the level, and I didn't go into all this. And my next one, I'm going to develop that. But this is what we're dealing with. This is what we're dealing with.